Aragorn was 20 years old the day Elrond told him who he was, which meant he had been someone else for 20 years and had not suspected it. He had grown up in Rivendell under the name Estel, which means hope, though nobody told him the name had been given with a purpose, not just out of love. His mother Gilrine brought him there at the age of 2, after his father Arathorn took an orc arrow through the eye in the wild lands north of the Bruinen. Elrond took the child in, raised him alongside his own sons, Eladin and Elrohir, and for 20 years the boy called Estel lived among elves without knowing that the broken sword on Elrond's mantelpiece was his inheritance, or that the ring in Elrond's keeping was his birthright, or that the name he answered to was not the one he was born with. On the day in question, Elrond called him into a south-facing study above the valley where the Bruinen talked to itself in every season and told him 3 things: his real name, his lineage, and what both of them demanded. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur. Direct descendant, through an unbroken line stretching back 3,000 years, of Elendil the Tall, who stood with Gil-galad on the slopes of Orodruin and died there. The shards of Narsil, the ring of Barahir, the star of Elendil, all of them his, all of them held in Rivendell for 38 generations, waiting for the hand that would carry them forward. Elrond delivered the heirlooms and the charge in the same speech. Here is the ring of Barahir, the token of our kinship from afar, and here also are the shards of Narsil. With these you may yet do great deeds, for I foretell that the span of your life shall be greater than the measure of men, unless evil befalls you or you fail at the test. But the test will be hard and long. The scepter of Annuminas I withhold, for you have yet to earn it. The name Estel stayed with him. His mother had given it, Elrond had honored it, and the Dunedain who would follow him into the wild in the decades ahead would use it among themselves as a private word for the thing they believed he carried. A direction more than a feeling, a destination they could not yet see and trusted was there because the boy, and then the man, kept walking toward it. The next day at the hour of sunset, Aragorn walked alone in the woods above the house, and his heart was high within him, and he sang. He was singing the lay of Luthien, the oldest of the elvish love stories, the tale of Beren the mortal man and Luthien, the immortal woman who danced in the forest of Neldoreth and together broke the order of the world. He sang it the way young men sing things, without thinking too carefully about what the words mean, because at 20 you can hold tragedy in your mouth like music and not yet taste it. She was standing among the birches. The evening light was behind her, and her dark hair was loose, and she was wearing a mantle of silver and blue, and for a moment outside of time, Aragorn believed he was seeing Luthien herself, risen from the ancient world and walking in Rivendell as the old songs promised she had walked in Neldoreth, and the word that fell out of him was her name, Tinuviel. He called her Tinuviel, which means nightingale, the name Beren gave Luthien when he first saw her dancing in the starlit woods, and could not think of anything more exact to say. The maiden turned to him and smiled.
Who are you? And why do you call me by that name?
Because I believed you to be indeed Luthien Tinuviel, of whom I was singing. But if you are not she, then you walk in her likeness.
So many have said. Yet her name is not mine, though maybe my doom will be not unlike hers. But who are you?
Estel I was called. But I am Aragorn, Arathorn's son, Isildur's heir, lord of the Dunedain.
Yet even in the saying he felt that this high lineage, in which his heart had rejoiced, was now of little worth, and as nothing compared to her dignity and loveliness. She was Arwen, daughter of Elrond, called Undomiel, the Evenstar of her people. She had been in Lothlorien, visiting her grandmother Galadriel, for a duration she did not specify and he did not ask about, because he was 20 and had learned his own name 4 hours ago and was now standing in front of the most beautiful person in Middle-earth, and his capacity for follow-up questions had departed. The likeness that had stopped him in the birch-wood was real and old. Arwen was the great-great-granddaughter of Luthien and Beren, through Dior and Elwing and Eärendil and Elrond himself, and the blood of Luthien Tinuviel was in her face, carried forward through 3,000 years of elvish generations without fading, the way a note of music carries through a hall long after the string has been struck. Elrond, when he learned about the meeting, said nothing for a while. He looked at Aragorn with the expression of a man who has been expecting a particular piece of bad news for several decades, and has just received it in the form of a 20-year-old with birch leaves in his hair. Then he spoke. He said that Arwen was the likeness of Lothlorien, and that a similar doom might await her. Doom not in the modern sense of catastrophe, but in the older sense, the one Tolkien meant, a fate chosen and accepted, binding beyond reversal. He said that Arwen would not be the bride of any man less than the king of both Gondor and Arna. The throne of Gondor had been empty of a king for 969 years. The throne of Arna had not existed in any working sense for even longer. The northern kingdom had splintered and dissolved into the scattered Dunedain of the Wild, of whom Aragorn was now chieftain, a title that carried about as much political standing as a deed to a house that had burnt down 10 centuries ago. Elrond was asking him to rebuild 2 kingdoms from nothing, against an enemy who had spent the same millennium consolidating every advantage. What Elrond asked was exact, and the exactness came from what it would cost. Elrond was half-elven. He had the choice of kindreds, to live as an elf or to accept mortality, and he had chosen the elven life, which meant that Arwen, his daughter, held the same choice. If she married a mortal man, she would make the choice of Lothlorien. She would surrender her immortality, step outside the circles of the elven world, and die. Her father would lose her to something worse than distance or time. He would lose her to an ending so absolute that no ship to Valinor, no grace of the valor, no passage of ages would reverse it. The demand was the act of a father who knew he could not prevent the loss, and so determined that the man who carried her into mortality would at least be someone who had done what no one had done in 1,000 years. The throne did not justify the sacrifice. Nothing could justify it. The only thing left, when justification was impossible, was to make the demand so large that the man who met it would have spent every year of his life walking toward the answer. Aragorn walked out of Rivendell the next morning and did not come back for 30 years. He rode with the rangers of the north, the remnant of the Dunedain who patrolled the borders of the Shire and the lands between Bree and the Misty Mountains, keeping roads passable and villages unburnt in a service so secret that the people they protected did not know they existed and occasionally resented them for looking disreputable. He grew lean and weathered and learned the kind of competence that does not announce itself, the kind that sleeps light and walks without noise and knows which berries will kill you before you have time to ask. Then he went south under other names. In Rohan, he served King Thengel as a cavalry captain called Thorongil, the Eagle of the Star. The Rohirrim trusted him because he rode well and fought without excess and did not talk about himself, which in Rohan counted as 3 virtues. In Gondor, he served Ecthelion II, the steward, and distinguished himself enough that Ecthelion favored him above his own son Denethor, which was a problem Aragorn could see forming and could not solve without revealing who he was. He led a raid on the corsairs of Umbar, burnt their ships in their own harbor, and vanished from Gondor's service the next morning. Denethor was not sorry to see him go, and spent the next 40 years wondering whether the stranger would come back and what it would mean if he did. Before leaving Rivendell, Aragorn had said goodbye to his mother. Gilrine, who had named him Estel and who had watched him grow up carrying a word he did not yet know was a prophecy, said to him,
So nen Estel a dine, ukabin Estel anim.
I gave hope to the Dunedain. I have kept no hope for myself. She died before he returned. The line she spoke sounds like a farewell, and it is also a description of what it feels like to give someone a name larger than the person who carries it, and then watch the name walk away into a country where you cannot follow. That line would find its echo decades later, in a stone house in Minas Tirith, when a different woman called the same name into a different silence. They met again in Lothlorien, in the Golden Wood, after 30 years apart. The hill of Cerin Amroth stood at the heart of the Elvish kingdom, among the malorn trees whose silver trunks rose without branch for 40 feet, and then opened into golden canopies that held the light in a way that made the wood beneath them feel like the inside of a lantern. Elanna and Nifredil grew on the green grass of the hill, small gold and white flowers that had bloomed there since the elder days and grew nowhere else in Middle-earth. They were holdovers from an older order, kept alive because Galadriel's power held the borders of the wood against the outside centuries. Aragorn came there. He was no longer young. His dark hair had grey in it, and his face carried the weather of Rohan and the sun of the southern deserts and the cold of the northern wastes. He wore worn travel clothes and carried himself with the economy of a man who had spent 3 decades not wasting movement. Arwen was unchanged, her dark hair ungrayed, her eyes the same grey as the evening sky that had met his 20-year-old stare in the birches. 30 years was nothing to her. She had lived nearly 3,000. The 30 that had remade him had left no mark on her at all. On the evening of midsummer, they walked to the hill together, unshod, with Elanna and Nifredil about their feet. They looked east to the shadow and west to the twilight, and they plighted their troth, and they were glad.
Dark is the shadow, and yet my heart rejoices. For you, Estel, shall be among the great whose valor will destroy it.
Alas, I cannot foresee it, and how it may come to pass is hidden from me. Yet with your hope I will hope.
The exchange holds the whole story in 4 sentences. She gave him her hope as a fact rather than a feeling, a pledge that he would be among those who destroyed the darkness. He received it and carried it forward. He could not see the road, but the hope had a face now, and the face believed in what he was walking toward even when he could not see it himself. The flowers were gold and white around their bare feet, and the evening star was above the Malorn canopy, and the pledge was made in the place where she would later come to die, though neither of them knew that yet, and knowing it would not have changed the answer. She went back to Rivendell, he went back to the wild. There were still years to fill. In the long halls of Elrond's house, Arwen worked on the standard she was making for him. A great banner, black, bearing the white tree of Gondor, the 7 stars, and the high crown, worked in silver and gold and set with gems that caught the light. She stitched it for a throne that did not yet exist, for a coronation that had no date, for a man who was sleeping on the ground somewhere between Bree and the Gladden fields, and carrying the hope she had given him along roads she could not walk. The message she would send with it, years later, carried through the grey company by Halbarad of the Dunedain.
The days now are short. Either our hope cometh, or all hopes end. Therefore I send thee what I have made for thee.
The banner was the only action available to her, the only thing she could do from inside the house, while the work happened in countries she could not go to and battles she could not fight. Thread by thread, she stitched the future into cloth. Each stitch was an act of belief in a man she had not seen in years, who was getting older somewhere beyond the mountains, who might die before the occasion arrived to unfurl it. Elrond watched this happen. The records do not preserve what he said, but the silence speaks clearly enough. He had set the terms, and now he was watching his daughter commit to a life she had not yet entered, stitch by stitch, in a house that was going to empty itself of elves before the century turned. She was going to stay behind because she had chosen mortality, and there was nothing he could do about any of it except watch the banner grow and understand what it meant. The War of the Ring arrived in 3018 and resolved in 3019, and this is not its story, so I will be brief. Aragorn came to the war carrying 60 years of preparation. The Ranger patrols, the southern campaigns, the hunts, the decades of learning Middle-earth the way a surgeon learns a body. When the crisis came, he was ready, and the readiness looked to the people around him like a weathered northerner who happened to know the right path and the right sword and the right words for the dead. At the Pelennor, he unfurled the standard Arwen had stitched. The gems caught the sunlight. The black field flew above the ships from Pelagia, and the corsair fleet that had come to reinforce Mordor carried instead the army that would break the siege. The standard that a woman had stitched in a house in Rivendell, thread by thread, in the years when the throne was still an idea nobody had seen, flew now over a battlefield where the idea became stone and blood and daylight. On the 1st of May, Gandalf set the winged crown on Aragorn's head before the gates of Minas Tirith, and the trumpets sounded, and the people who had survived the war cheered for their king, who had arrived roughly a millennium late, but had brought good references. On the day of midsummer, Aragorn stood at the gate and looked south. A company came riding from the north. The banner of Elrond flew among them, and the banners of Lothlorien, and among the riders came Elrond himself, who had raised Aragorn from the age of 2, who had named the price, and who had come now to do the one thing that remained. Arwen rode beside her father. She wore silver and blue. The Evenstar hung at her throat. The people of Minas Tirith, who had never seen an elf in their lives, and who knew Arwen only as a name in a story most of them did not believe, saw her come through the gate and understood, in the way that crowds sometimes understand things at once, that the world was changing in the space between one footfall and the next. Tolkien gives the wedding one paragraph. He says that Aragorn the King Elessar wedded Arwen Undomiel in the City of the Kings upon the day of midsummer, and the tale of their long waiting came to an end. One paragraph. After 3,000 years of her life and 87 of his, after 60 years of work and 30 of waiting, after a demand named in a room above a river that talked to itself in every season. Tolkien knew what he was doing. If he had lingered on the wedding, the grief underneath would have come through, and this was the beginning, and the grief belongs to the end. Before the hobbits left Minas Tirith, Arwen gave the Evenstar to Frodo. The Evenstar was the white jewel she wore at her throat, the gem Tolkien names but does not describe, because describing it would have reduced it to something that could be compared to other things. It was the last physical object binding her to her people. A jewel of the Noldor, the light of the Eldar set in silver, worn against the skin for centuries. She told the ring-bearer,
"A gift I will give you, for I am the daughter of Elrond. I shall not go with him now when he departs to the havens. For mine is the choice of Lothlorien, and as she so have I chosen, both the sweet and the bitter. But in my stead you shall go, ring-bearer, when the time comes, and if you then desire it."
She was giving him the passage she had surrendered. She was saying, "I cannot go, you can, take this and leave." The gift and its finality were the same act. She was keeping Aragorn and the children who would come and the mortal life she had chosen, and to keep them, she let go of the last thing that tied her to the other life. After the jewel sailed on the last ship and the sea closed behind it, there would be nothing left to release, and the choice would be complete. She had pledged it years earlier on a green hill. Now she would feel it in the hollow at her throat, where the jewel had hung for longer than most kingdoms had lasted. 2 years later, Elrond left Middle-earth. He rode to the Grey Havens in September of the year 3021 with Gandalf and Galadriel and the ring-bearers, and took ship into the west. Frodo wore the Evenstar, the jewel Arwen had given him, the passage she had surrendered, and the white gem caught the evening light as the ship moved out from the quay, and the last of the great elves of Middle-earth passed into a place where the story cannot follow them. The record does not say whether Elrond looked back. He had kept his word. He had delivered his daughter to the king, and now he was going to a place where she could not follow, and the sea was going to close between them with a finality that no letter, no memory, no ship sailing in the wrong direction could repair. He had known this was coming since a boy called her Tinuviel under the birches of Rivendell. He had known it on Cerin Amroth, when she pledged herself to mortality on a green hill under the Malorns. He had set the terms knowing they would not prevent the outcome. He set them so the loss would carry a demand large enough that the man at the center of it would have spent his whole life becoming someone who deserved to stand there. Arwen did not sail. The text does not say where she was when the havens emptied. What it says is that Elrond went into the west, and that the 3 rings had lost their power, and that an age was ending. What it leaves unsaid is that the daughter who had chosen mortality now lived in a world where her father, her grandmother, and the entire undying civilization of her kindred were on the far side of a sea she could not cross. The hope she had given Aragorn on Cerin Amroth, the hope that had carried them both through 30 years of separation and 5 of war, now lived only in the man beside her and the children they would raise and the kingdom they would tend together, because every other vessel that had held it was gone. They had 120 years together, and the years were good. This is worth saying plainly, because the end of the story throws a long shadow and it is tempting to read backward through it, to treat every good year as if it were already haunted by the last one. It was not. The happiness was real and unqualified and ordinary in the way that the best happiness is, two people who loved each other and had work to do and did it together. Aragorn governed well. He extended the borders of the kingdom, rebuilt Minas in the north, the ancient seat of Arna, which had been a ruin since before any living man could remember, and renewed the alliances that the long stewardship had let decay. Eomer of Rohan, who had fought beside him at the Pelennor and the Black Gate, remained his ally and friend for the rest of his life. They visited each other's kingdoms regularly, and the bond between Gondor and Rohan, which the war had rekindled, held for their lifetimes and beyond. Faramir governed Ithilien as its prince, and the Garden province that had been a debatable frontier for centuries became a green and settled country again. The roads were rebuilt, the borderlands were replanted. Gondor, which had spent a millennium contracting, began to recover. Arwen bore him a son, Eldarion, who would reign after him, and daughters whose names the record does not give, which is a failure of the record and not of the daughters. The white tree flowered in the court of the kings, and the years turned, and the city that had been running for nearly 1,000 years on institutional endurance, and a plain chair at the foot of an empty throne now, had a king and a queen who remembered the First Age as fact rather than legend. She brought something to the court that the court had not had, not magic. The magic was leaving Middle-earth with the elves, ring by ring, ship by ship. She brought the memory of a world the Gondorians had only read about in their archives. She had walked in Lothlorien when Galadriel's power still held the golden wood outside of time. She had lived in Rivendell when the Noldor still sang in the halls, and the waterfalls spoke in voices older than the sun. She carried 3,000 years of undying life inside a body that was now, for the first time, mortal, and the people around her, from the counselors in the citadel to the children who played in the lower circles of the city, lived alongside a woman who could describe the music of the First Age as something she had heard with her own ears rather than something she had read. The difference between those two kinds of knowing gave the court a depth it had not possessed since the days of the Ship Kings. The elves departed, not all at once, since the thinning had been underway for centuries, but the Fourth Age accelerated the going. Rivendell emptied. The house where Aragorn had grown up, where the waterfalls spoke in the valley and the light came through old glass in colors that did not exist outside of elvish craft, stood vacant. The grey havens grew less busy and then grew silent. The elvish presence in Middle-earth, which had been fading since the end of the First Age, faded further, and the world that remained was made for mortals, governed by mortals, remembering the elves the way a grown child remembers a language spoken only at home. A few phrases, a melody, the feeling of something familiar that can no longer be quite said. Arwen lived in this world. She lived in it carrying an entire civilization inside her memory, with fewer and fewer people left who shared the reference. She could speak Quenya to no one. She could describe the light of Lothlorien to no one who had seen it. The halls of Elrond, the song in the birch-wood, the golden canopy of the Malorns, all of it was hers alone now, an archive of a world that had sailed away, kept in the memory of a woman who had chosen to stay behind. And Aragorn aged. The Dunedain lived long, and the royal line could reach 200 years and beyond, but they did not live forever, and the aging was visible to a woman who had spent 3 millennia watching mortality from the outside. She had seen mortals grow old before. She had watched the Edain silver and slow and stop. But watching it happen to someone she loved was a different thing from watching it happen to someone she merely observed. Observation lets you look away. Love does not. Eomer died in the year 63 of the Fourth Age. He was the last of the companions from the war whom Aragorn had counted as a friend and an equal, the Rohirric king who had charged with him across the Pelennor, who had ridden to the Black Gate, who had visited Minas Tirith in the good years, and renewed the oath sworn on the field. After Eomer, the friends who remained were the friends Aragorn had made as king, not the ones who had made him. The world was turning over its people, and Aragorn carried the years with a stillness that did not need announcing, and Arwen could see the carrying. and the seeing was a kind of knowledge she had not had before, because knowledge about mortality and the experience of watching it arrive in the person you love are two entirely different things. In the year 120 of the Fourth Age, Aragorn went to the House of the Kings in the silent street of Minas Tirith, and he lay down on the long bed prepared there, and he told Arwen that he was choosing to go. Not dying, choosing. The royal line of the Dunedain had this gift, inherited from Númenor before the downfall, the ability to surrender life willingly, while strength and clarity remained, before the slow diminishment of age stripped from them what they would not give. It was a death that was not a defeat, a laying down made with the same deliberateness with which he had entered the wild 60 years before. He was 210 years old. He had reigned for 120 of them. He had reunited the kingdoms, replanted the tree, raised a son fit to follow him, and outlived every companion of the fellowship except the elf and the dwarf. The work was done. He spoke to her.
Take counsel with yourself, beloved, and ask whether you would indeed have me wait until I wither and fall from my high seat, unmanned and witless. Nay, lady, I am the last of the Númenorians and the latest king of the elder days. And to me has been given not only a span thrice, that of men of Middle-earth, but also the grace to go at my will and give back the gift. Now, therefore, I will sleep. I speak no comfort to you, for there is no comfort for such pain within the circles of the world.
And Arwen answered him,
Nay, dear lord, that choice is long over. There is now no ship that would bear me hence, and I must indeed abide the doom of men, whether I will or I nill, the loss and the silence. But I say to you, king of the Númenorians, not till now have I understood the tale of your people and their fall. As wicked fools I scorned them, but I pity them at last. For if this is indeed, as the Eldar say, the gift of the one to men, it is bitter to receive.
3,000 years. She had watched mortals die for 3,000 years, and in all that time she had not understood. She had observed it, studied it, even mourned it at a distance from a position that remained untouched. Understanding mortality asks for the one thing observation cannot give, which is the experience of standing inside it while it happens to someone you love. She had thought the Númenorians who feared death and grasped after the undying life were fools. She had thought their fall, the drowning of their island, the corruption of their kings, their war against the valor for a few more borrowed centuries, was the story of people too proud to accept a gift. And now, standing beside the stone bed, watching her husband prepare to leave her, she understood them. The gift was real, and the gift was bitter, and the bitterness took nothing away from it. Understanding that had cost her 3,000 years and a man lying down in a stone house to die.
But let us not be overthrown at the final test, who of old renounced the shadow and the ring. In sorrow we must go, but not in despair. Behold, we are not bound forever to the circles of the world, and beyond them is more than memory. Farewell.
Estel, Estel.
She called him by the name his mother gave him, the name that means hope. The same name Gilreen had spoken into farewell when she said she had given hope to the Dunedain and kept none for herself. And now Arwen was calling it into the same silence, the word that had been a purpose and an endearment and a direction and a man all at once, and was now becoming a memory. He took her hand and kissed it and fell into sleep, and a great beauty was revealed in him, so that all who came there afterward looked on him in wonder, the grace of his youth, and the valor of his manhood, and the wisdom and majesty of his age blended together. Long there he lay, an image of the splendor of the kings of men, in glory, undimmed before the breaking of the world. Arwen went forth from the house, and the light of her eyes was quenched, and it seemed to her people that she had become cold and grey as nightfall in winter that comes without a star. She said farewell to Eldarion, she said farewell to her daughters, she said farewell to all whom she had loved, and she went out from the city of Minas Tirith and passed away to the land of Lorien. The journey north would have taken weeks, through Rohan, where Eomer's heirs governed a country that barely remembered what an elf looked like, through the Gap and up through Eriador, past the ruins of roads that had been great roads once and were tracks now through birch and bracken, north and east, to the eaves of a forest that had been golden and was now grey. Lothlorien was empty. Galadriel had passed into the west. Celeborn was gone. The Galadrim had departed, company by company, until the last Malorn stood in a wood that held nobody. The silver trunk still rose, but the canopy was thin, and the light that came through it was ordinary daylight, not the preserved twilight that Galadriel's power had held within the borders for 2 ages of the world. The flets were empty. The stairs climbed to platforms where no one sat. The land was silent. Arwen dwelt there alone under the fading trees until winter came. That sentence is Tolkien's, and there is nothing to add to it. She who had chosen mortality lived out the last of her mortal days in a wood that had been the heart of the elvish world, and was now a stand of tall, pale trees with nobody among them. The 3,000 years she carried, the fountains of Rivendell, the songs of the Noldor, the golden light of Lothlorien in the years when the light meant something, all of it was hers alone in that forest, and there was no one left to hear it, and the trees were just trees. When the Malorn leaves were falling but spring had not yet come, she went to the hill. Cerin Amroth, the green mound at the heart of the wood where 2 rings of trees had grown, and where the Alanna and Nifredil had bloomed gold and white among the grass in the years when the wood still held the light. This was the place where she had stood beside Aragorn and pledged herself to him. He had been 50 then, grey from 30 years in the wild, lined by the weather of 3 kingdoms, in travel-stained clothes, moving like a man who had learned to spend nothing he did not need to. She had looked at him and chosen mortality. She had stepped off the undying road. The grass had been green, and the flowers had been gold and white around her feet, and the evening star had been above her, and the choice had felt like an opening, like a door into a room that was warm and lit, and held a life she could see herself living. It was winter now. The grass was frozen or gone. The Malorn leaves lay in pale drifts on the hillside. The branches overhead were bare. The flowers that had survived since before the sun were under frost or had not come. She laid herself to rest on the hill, in the place where the choosing was done. Tolkien gives this one sentence, and then he stops, and the stopping is the most merciful thing in the book. There is her green grave, he writes, until the world is changed, and all the days of her life are utterly forgotten by men that come after, and Alanna and Nifredil bloom no more east of the sea. A woman who lived 3,000 years, who remembered the light of the 2 trees through her father's voice, who walked in Lothlorien when the golden wood still stood outside of time, who chose mortality for a man she loved, and was loved in return, and had 120 good years, and lost him, and walked alone to the hill where the choosing was done, and lay down in the cold, and died with no one present and nothing to mark the moment except bare trees and frost, and the last of the Malorn leaves falling around her. Their 2 deaths did not resemble each other, and the difference held to the last. He died in a stone house, surrounded by his people with ceremony, with the dignity of a departure planned in advance. She died on a frozen hillside with nobody there and nothing to mark it. He chose the time. She was left with what remained after the choosing. And the name she called at the end, Estel, Estel, the name his mother gave him in Rivendell, the name that means hope, the name Gilreen surrendered when she said she had given hope to the Dunedain and kept none for herself. The same name, spoken into the same silence, by a different woman who had given everything she had to the man who carried it, and who was now, like Gilreen before her, standing in the place where hope had been and finding that the word was still there, but the man was not. The distance between the word and the man was the whole story. Here ends this tale, as it has come to us from the south, and with the passing of Evenstar, no more is said in this book of the days of old.